Hello and welcome back to my world of stuff. Something slightly different for today's video. I'm going to take a little look back at a race of creatures who first appeared in Doctor Who in 1972. They're called the Sea Devils and they look like this. Well, they look like that back in 1972. I'm doing this video today because the Sea Devils are back in this weekend's new Doctor Who special Easter episode, The Legend of the Sea Devils. So I thought I'd just do a quick flashback to the 70s and 80s when the Sea Devils first appeared in Doctor Who, and just give a little a viewpoint and opinion of the stories they've appeared in so far, because Sea Devils, their return has been fairly long awaited amongst Doctor Who cognoscenti, of which I consider myself one. So it'll be quite nice just to look back at how they've been presented in the past, how they've changed their look, a bit like the Cybermen and the Sontarans. Perhaps this sort of costumes change and adapted as they've appeared. They've only appeared a couple of times. They're not one of the big main Doctor Who regular monsters, but I think that fans have a very soft place to them in their hearts, and I think most fans, rather than the less extreme ones, are looking forward to seeing them again. So anyway, the Sea Devil history then actually predates 1970. The race that they are part of were the Silurians, who first appeared in a serial called Doctor Who and the Silurians, which aired in 1970 as part of John Pertwee's first season of Doctor Who. Now, John Pertwee, of course, the third Doctor, exiled to Earth at the end of the previous year's War Games episode, which was the end of Patrick Troughton's time in the role. And the show's format was refashioned to have the Doctor exiled to Earth in a new body and working for UNIT, the United Nations Intelligence Task Force, as it was then, as a scientific advisor, an organisation set up in the wake of certain things which happened in the late 60s in Doctor Who specifically, where aliens were making their presence known upon the Earth. So the Doctor fortuitously found himself seconded to this organisation when he landed on Earth in his new body. And that was the format of Doctor Who for several years until it started to sort of slacken off a little bit, and the Doctor's ability to travel in time and space was restored. The series at this particular time was produced by Barry Letts and his script editor Terence Dix, and they took over Doctor Who with this new format that had been sort of foisted upon them. And it wasn't one that they were particularly happy with. They wanted Doctor Who to be a show which travelled through time and space, as it always had done. But budgetary limitations and a sense that the show was running out of steam slightly in the 1960s, because I think it did become slightly quaint and whimsical in its last couple of years in the 60s, and it needed a bit of a shake-up to survive in the bold new colour TV era of the 1970s. But the problems inherent in having the Doctor trapped in one place is it does tend to limit the sort of stories you can tell. And I think it was possibly Terence Dix or Malcolm Hulke who postulated the theory that if you've got a character on Earth, like the Doctor, you've got three types of story. You've got an invasion Earth story where aliens come to Earth. You've got a mad scientist story. Or you've got a story where the threat is already here and is uncovered. And that's very much what the Silurians was in 1970. The story basically concerns a nuclear research facility up in the hills of Derbyshire that's suffering strange power losses. And the Doctor and UNIT investigate, and it transpires that those power losses are being caused by a race of subterranean reptile creatures called the Silurians. These creatures were the original owners of the planet Earth, if you like, the original intelligent life on Earth, who ruled the planet millions of years before the human race came along. They went into an enforced hibernation when they realised that a comet was coming towards the Earth that would possibly wipe out all life on Earth. Their hibernation devices failed to reactivate, and they've stayed in hibernation ever since, but they've woken up and they're now using the power of the nuclear reactor at the research facility to awaken themselves, and of course it's their planet, they want it back. That's the thrust of the narrative of the Silurians, which is fairly typical of that first John Pertwee season. I've got a lot of time for that first John Pertwee season because that is the closest Doctor Who's really ever come, or certainly classic Doctor Who ever came to being an adult science fiction series. It has that gritty Quatermass sort of feel. It's got a very industrial 1970s sort of industrial revolution type feel to it, with lots of factories and research labs and that sort of thing. It makes it feel quite gritty and grounded, and it's worlds away from the quaintness of things like the Dominators and the Quarks that the series had done just a year before. It's Doctor Who putting its adult trousers on, basically. And the Silurians is a fairly typical example of that, with the reptilian Silurians themselves presented as a sympathetic and intelligent race. They want their planet back, basically. These hairless hominid creatures have come to power, and they want back what's theirs. And whilst we and the Doctor and everybody in the story disagrees with the methods that they choose to try and get their planet back, at one point they unleash a virulent plague which threatens to wipe out the human race. But we do have some sympathy because ultimately it's their property, the Earth. They were here first. Silurians is a good story. It's possibly overlong at 7 episodes, but it's a very good, intelligent story that makes good use of this idea of something was here before us. The story then was followed up in 1972 by written by the same writer, incidentally, Malcolm Hulke, who was a very good 1970s scriptwriter for Doctor Who. He had a very good fine eye for dialogue and character, and he was one of those writers who, people criticise Doctor Who today for being preachy, but his version of Doctor Who was quite preachy too, but in possibly a more subtle way. But in the Sea Devils, it basically revisits the same idea as the Silurians, but does it from an aquatic viewpoint. We're several years on now. The Doctor's still in exile on Earth, but the Time Lords send him off on little missions now and again, which was Terence Dicks and Barry Lett's way of sort of loosening the Doctor Who format that was forced upon them. And their enemy, the Master, who had appeared in every serial in the second John Pertwee season, he'd been imprisoned at the end of the Demons, and in the Sea Devils we see the Doctor and Jo travelling to meet him to see how he's getting on, see if he's been treated well. He's being imprisoned in a top security establishment on a remote island in the English Channel near Portsmouth. But something strange is happening. Boats are disappearing, boats are blowing up, something strange is going on. Inevitably, the Doctor investigates. It turns out that the Masters in League has made contact with creatures who are dubbed the Sea Devils by somebody who encounters them. There's a sort of a roustabout working on an abandoned rig fort in the Solent who sees one of these creatures and just in his fever and his hysteria calls it a Sea Devil, and that name sort of sticks. They're actually the underwater versions of the Silurians, who history recalls are themselves misnamed because the era they came from was the Eocene era, so they should have been the Eocenes. But I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole. They're Silurians and Sea Devils. What the hell? So the Sea Devils, again, very memorable creations, with these sort of almost parrot-type heads. You can see them here. The string vest type thing. They're a sort of classic mid-70s Doctor Who creature. I'm not going to call them monsters because, again, they weren't really monsters. The story was the same as the Silurians, but it had a lot of naval paraphernalia. The BBC were lucky enough to get the cooperation of the Royal Navy, who let them use their establishment, their equipment, and a lot of their personnel. So the serial looks big. It looks bigger scale than perhaps many of them the stories had, because they had access to submarines and boats and all this sort of, paraphernalia, basically, that wouldn't normally be available on a Doctor Who BBC budget. So it looks like a big glossy serial, and it's probably the best story to showcase the antipathy between the Doctor and the Master, played brilliantly as ever by Roger Delgado. There's a couple of terrific scenes where they're just facing off against one another and dueling with words. The Doctor's got the moral high ground, but the Master's got this sort of slightly quirky, diffident, slightly tongue-in-cheek look at the way the Doctor operates and the way the Doctor's morality operates. And of course, there's the classic scene, I think it's the end of episode 3, where the Doctor and the Master have a sword fight. And it's sort of Pertwee's Doctor Who era at its best, really. People often say the Demons from the previous season. That's a classic story because it's got the Doctor Who unit family. But I think that the Sea Devils is quintessential 70s Doctor Who. And the Sea Devils themselves are an interesting looking creature. Those sort of enlarged heads, the actors playing the parts looked through the neck, so they had these larger heads and these sort of fins and things. And it's a very good story. It's a terrific story. And again, it engenders that sympathy that you have towards the Sea Devils, because all they're doing is trying to get back what they feel is rightfully theirs. And as much as the Doctor tries to act as a go-between with the human race and the Sea Devils, ultimately, as in the Silurians, the human condition wins out and the Sea Devils are dispatched in an explosion. much to the Doctor's chagrin, as it was in the Silurians. We didn't see the Sea Devils again then for many years. We didn't see them for, in fact, 12 years. They reappeared in 1984 in a serial in the 5th Doctor's era. Peter Davison was the Doctor by now. It's his 3rd and final season. And they reappeared in a story written by Johnny Byrne called The Warriors of the Deep. Now, there's a lot to like about this story, but there's a lot of things wrong with it. I'm not going to go, well, actually, I probably am going to go through the things that are wrong with it. But I really like the idea of the story here. This is set in the future where there's, as there always is, and there certainly is now, sort of a great tension between the East and the West. And both powers have got their fingers on the nuclear button trigger, and, you know, the balloon could go up at any time. We know how that feels. But in this story, a sea base, there's been a sea base established. Apparently it's a thing in the future because the Doctor knows about sea bases. Where underwater bases that monitor technology and control by the facility of sort of brain links. There's a sort of operative who can link into a computer and operate nuclear weapons through the power of the brain. So this base, this big glossy slick base underwater, attracts the attention of a cabal of, yes, Silurians and Sea Devils. They've teamed up. There are 3 Silurians, whose names are something like Skibus and Iktar and another one. And they awaken an army of Sea Devil warriors. They call them Sea Devils as well. I'm not quite sure why they call them Sea Devils when that was a human name given to them, but we won't worry about that. And they proceed to attack the base so they can control the nuclear armaments and eventually cause a holocaust, which will give them power over the Earth, which is what they've always wanted. So again, it's that same story that we've had in the previous serials, but done in a futuristic setting with that as was present then and as present today, that threat of nuclear annihilation hanging over everything. There's a lot to like about this story, but there are, as I've said, things that let it down quite badly. First of all, I do like the design of the underwater base itself, this big high-tech base that's full of sort of gantries and clattering sort of metallic walkways and glossy, slick corridors and things. A lot of people criticise it. They say that it looks overlit, and that because obviously it's in a studio in the BBC television centre as it was at the time. It looks glossy and it looks slick and overlit. But I don't really understand that criticism, because at the end of the day, the story's set in a base at the bottom of the sea. It's going to be lit high. It's going to have bright lights because it's dark down there, and you're going to want as much light as possible. And I think that adds to the clinical antiseptic look of the serial, the fact that it does look that it's set in a remote, extreme location. So that criticism is one that I don't really get. And I think we were used in the 80s to Doctor Who being brightly lit and studio lights were cranked right up, but I think that works to the advantage of this particular story. The Sea Devils and Silurians themselves don't come off as well as they have in the past. The Silurians look like more or less like the original Silurians, but they sort of they look more like men in costumes, I think, than they did in the past. They've got these sort of strange, sort of almost like jacket affairs over them, and their eyes flash when they talk, which wasn't the purpose of the flashing eye in the original serial. It was sort of a weapon in the original serial. But they, the story does maintain the same sort of core values of the Silurians, in that they want to take over or regain control of what's rightfully theirs. Sea Devils don't suffer, aren't presented particularly well at all. I can see the narrative logic in creating them as a race of warriors. I don't really see the logic in putting them in these bizarre samurai type costumes, these black things with these big shoulders and these helmets, and the masks are sort of jet black instead of that sort of greeny aquatic thing that they were in the Sea Devils. And the costumes don't do them any favours, because they lurch and stumble around the place, and the costumes don't look particularly comfortable for the actors to wear. And of course, I'm not going to talk about certain other things. In the story, the Sea Devils, the Silurians at one point call upon a creature called a Merker to attack the base. The Merker is a sort of underwater dragon-type creature. Let's just say it's not one of Doctor Who's better visual effects. It's pretty ropey. And performances are slightly ripe in some of the actors as well. Ingrid Pitt plays one of the scientists who is a sort of Russian spy, or a spy for the other side, in league with the character played by Ian McCulloch, who had not long within the last few years been in Survivors, which is one of my favourite BBC shows of the 70s. And her performance is a little over the top, particularly in the sequence where she seems to indulge in a karate fight with the Merker, which is quite bizarre. But otherwise, there's a lot to like in this story. I think it's a good script, but it is let down by an over-ambitious production. There are scenes, for example, where the Merker is trying to crash through a metal door, which is clearly made of foam, despite the fact they put some slightly feeble creaking door sound effects over what is clearly a bit of foam collapsing. And I think without the Merker, without all that sort of stuff, I think it would be a better regarded story. But I think there's a lot to like in it. But I don't think it's the worst of the stories to feature the Sea Devils and the Silurians, because the two stories that established those creatures were so good. So that brings us up to date, really. As far as we've not seen the Sea Devils or the Silurians since. However, he says, a costume of the original Sea Devils actually appears in a 1981 episode of Blake 7, the first episode of season 4. I think it's called Rescue, where Avon and his crew are trapped on a planet. The Liberator's been destroyed at the end of the previous season, and they meet a character called Dorian, who's a thinly veiled version of Dorian Gray, who keeps himself alive. There's an alien creature in a tunnel, which we see at one point, and it's a Sea Devil mask with sort of a ropey sort of costume slung over it. So that's sort of unfortunate fate that met the original Sea Devil costumes. But no, we've not seen the Sea Devils in Doctor Who ever since. There's been in comic strips. I'm sure there's been books where they've appeared. But this weekend's story, The Legend of the Sea Devils, is the first chance for us to see them since 1984. And I'm looking forward to it. There have been rumours in the fan community for several years, there's a Sea Devil story. And I understand that this story comes about because the function of the creatures in the original idea for the story were clearly the same as the Sea Devils. So it was decided, well, why not make it the Sea Devils? You've seen the trailer. I think it looks pretty good. Fortunately, there's a lot of Sea Devils in. I think there's about 8 or 9 costumes that have been created. And if you've seen the story, if you've seen the trailer, it's a sort of a Pirates of the Caribbean type thing set in China. It looks nice. It's got a nice glossy visual aesthetic. And I like the redesigned look of the Silurians. It does have that, as I say, that aesthetic of the pirates, rotting, ghostly pirates and Pirates of the Caribbean with these long cloaks and things with barnacles on them. And if you notice in the publicity photographs, there's a shot of a Sea Devil that's got a little brooch type thing with a little bit of the blue string vest type thing that the Sea Devils wore in 1972 as a little nod back to those original Sea Devils, I think. So I'm looking forward to seeing them again. Slightly disappointed now to discover that the episode's only 50 minutes, so it means it's got to rattle along. But it'll just be nice to see another one of the classic Doctor Who creatures done well and sympathetic. And I think whatever you think of Chris Chibnall and his era of Doctor Who, it has its critics. I think it's been generally quite good, quite imaginative. But I think he has treated classic Doctor Who creatures with a lot more respect than his predecessor in the producer's chair. But I'm not going to go through all that again. So that's a potted history, if you like, or look back at the previous appearances of the Silurians, the Sea Devils of Doctor Who, as a primer for the new episode that arrives at 7:10 on Easter Sunday on BBC One. I will be doing a review of it, of course. You can expect that on my channel either late Sunday night or Monday morning. I'm looking forward to it very much. As I look forward to any Doctor Who story, I always hope for the best for Doctor Who. There's always something to remind you of why this is such a possibly addictive series that once it's under your skin, it stays there. So that's the Sea Devils and Silurians. Let me know what you think of this little video. Let me know if you've got any particular memories of their previous appearances or what your favourite episodes that they've appeared in the past. If you've stumbled across this channel in your quest for Doctor Who related stuff, why not like and subscribe? It's not a purely Doctor Who channel, but I'm a big fan and I do reviews of new merchandise and new episodes and things, so always worth keeping an eye out. Lots of film reviews, unboxings, all that sort of caper. So press that like button, subscribe, leave a comment, and until I see you next time, keep taking the underwater stuff.